Everyone. Now it's time for Mr. Joachim Werner and the project Chabata, a live CD on steroids.
So is this guy seriously going to talk about bread? I think that's the question that some of you may have. Chabata, well, Italian white bread, cool thing, but not quite what I'm going to talk about. Let's start with the question, who is this guy who's standing in front of you? Well, I'm kind of inadvertently taking over that superhero motif from the keynote talk. But I'm sure a few of you haven't seen me before, and I don't see you now because it's so dark down there. On any mailing list, well, I'm subscribed to most of the openSUSE mailing list, but I'm mostly listening in. Who I am, I'm Joachim Werner, or Joe Werner. I'm one of the product managers for SUSE, working on the systems management part, so that's SUSE Manager as a product, but also all the YAST stuff, Zipper, the whole update stack, that's kind of in my responsibility. I've been with SUSE in my 10th year now, so almost 10 years, and I've been doing open source before that, mainly in the content management system space, using Python and Zope. Yeah, and to be honest, I haven't really coded for years. But that is going to change because I have a problem to solve. And that's how most of the open source projects more or less start. To start with, if you have any questions, I think it's best to just come up with them right away. We've got the 2 microphones or so. Or I make sure to repeat the question for the recording. There's a problem that all of us have. How can I easily demonstrate the power of openSUSE to friends, to my parents, to colleagues? And well, there is a well-known solution for that. And that's basically what I've been using, what my kids have been using to convince their friends about the power of SUSE. And that's, of course, the live CDs or live DVDs, and more recently, basically the USB thumb drive. So friends of my son would be using them to circumvent the Windows parental control stuff because they can just boot from the live CD, all those things. And it's really easy because it works out of the box. You don't have to configure anything. It's just a very nice experience. And as Garrett pointed out in his keynote, it's really important to have that easy access to open source software to make it easier to use. But what if I need to demonstrate not just a single Linux desktop, a GNOME desktop, a KDE desktop, but I want to show off a more complex scenario with more than one Linux system? And I've taken a few examples from our corporate side of the SUSE Linux world. First of all, the project I used to be running in the last couple of years, SUSE Linux Enterprise Point of Service, where we are running whole retail infrastructures, sometimes 30,000, 50,000 cash registers in thousands of department stores around countries, sometimes around the world. And those systems, if you want to show off how this whole system works with a central server and distributed servers that help you boot up cash registers, you need more than one demo system. You cannot just show that on a live CD. You have to have all this infrastructure, at least virtually. You have to have virtual cache registers, virtual servers, virtual networks, or a high availability cluster. You want to show somebody how high availability with 2 or more Linux servers work. And you don't have the possibility to go there with a whole rack of servers. You have to show that in a small box. Another example, SUSE Manager, our patch management product, and then SUSE Studio, where there's the online version that you all know, the website you can go to, but there's also a version of SUSE Studio that you can use in your own data center. And to show how those 2 interact, you need at least 2 servers, and one of them has to be able to have virtual machines running as part of it. So that's the scenarios When do I actually need those? I mentioned some of them earlier, like impress my friends, my colleagues about a cool project. But of course, my motivation to some extent is help sell Linux-based projects. And not just for SUSE, but also to our partners, to our consulting partners. Well, our friends within companies who sometimes are not really customers, but almost like community members, helping us to promote the idea of using open source software in the company. And don't forget that not all salespersons are hackers. So if you tell them, okay, there's this script, you can easily set things up, and you just have to go to the command line and do this and that. Well, it's not always as easy as that. And also, this whole thing would be helpful to learn about things. So if you are a new team member at SUSE or in an open source project, and you just want to see how this all works, and okay, you can check out the source code, and you can read all the documentation, but it may take you quite a long time to actually try things out, because of all those little things you have to figure out, to configure, to make sure that it all works. So what if I was just able to download this whole thing like a live CD and just fire it up and get going? Journalists, unfortunately Marcus just left us. Yeah, journalists trying to get a glimpse of what's going on with the project. And then finally, as I mentioned, consultants and partners. But there's more than just demos. So those scenarios, I think we understand quite well. This can also be taken a step further. Make it easy for a developer, not just to try out the code, but to use it to set up a repeatable development environment that he or she can use to develop not just that single piece of code, but also see the big picture. How is my code going to interact with the other servers, with the other processes, with all those dependencies? And then, of course, doing the same in the next step, in the quality assurance step, where it's, of course, much easier for a tester to have a system that the developer has been using, and that the developer understands, and just use that same system for testing. And ultimately, we may even come up with something that makes operations easier. So if we can take the same ideas of pre-configured setups and a very modular system where anything I want to run as building blocks is pre-built, well understood, this could also be something that makes IT operations easier. And there even is a buzzword for that. I guess some of you have heard about it, DevOps. DevOps is a bit like cloud. You can put a lot of meaning into the word, but the basic understanding I have is really making it easy to have very little loss between the transitions from development to QA, testing, and operations, because you're using the same tools. You're looking at the process of publishing your production environment, very similar to a software development process where you have templates, you have repeatable code that you can apply, that you can version control, that you can audit, and all those things. And not like when you hand it over to a production, they have completely different tools, like it is often in many companies I know. They would have people developing software, other people packaging it up as RPMs because they have to, because operations says we are Linux, we have to have RPMs. And then those RPMs are used by production, and nobody in the chain really knows why they are doing all those things and how they fit together. And DevOps really wants to change it. Whatever the developers use, you should also make sure operations can understand and use. Or maybe even the same people in some cases would take care of that. So let's come back to the bread. Why Chabata? Well, this was just my trying to find a name that is somehow unique, that is not in any way tainted, and that sounds nice. So it's inspired by cloud in a box. Another alternative of calling this would be data center in a box. I may have ended up with Diabolo also, but yeah, it's probably already taken and it has a negative connotation. So, but this is really just a project name, so don't interpret too much into the bread. Now, what are the immediate goals of Chabata? We've kind of covered some of the use cases already. Make it as easy as possible to demo complex Linux-based setups on a laptop. That's the initial goal, because everybody told me you need at least a big laptop with lots of gigabytes of RAM to get this all done. But these days, sometimes you can run a virtual machine within a laptop that then uses nested virtualization. So you virtualize within the virtualization. You can basically demonstrate anything. You can simulate a whole world in a virtual machine. Combine demo, marketing, and documentation in one experience. So that's where I think things could get to the next step. You not only show off, let's say, how two HA servers work, but in the same tool, you provide the documentation, you provide a white paper people can read, some storybook, some screenplay where they can go and basically follow your scripted experience, and at any point, of course, stop and look at the live system. And well, of course, you have to create a community around that, because the tool itself is useless. You have to have the tool, but you also have to have images, Linux images that you can use in that tool. Let's say if I want to demonstrate HA, I need high availability nodes. If I want to demonstrate a complex setup, let's say a WordPress instance that is fault tolerant with backend servers and load balancer and so on, I have to have somebody building all those images. And also those scenarios I mentioned, okay, bringing it all together, those templates, and you could call them screenplays, scripts. And there are some, in this case, not collateral damage, but collateral goals that would just basically fall out of that. Sorry. And yeah, that's basically that we on the fly would build a base that can be reused in a DevOps environment for development, for scenarios and images for automated testing, but as I said, also for production scenarios ultimately. Now, what are the pieces of that puzzle on the technical end? First of all, of course, I need specs for the runtime environment to start with, and I started with pretty powerful specs, 16 gigs of RAM and an SSD. The SSD makes it much easier to have frequent iterations, because setting up a new system is just so much faster. And my current working machine for that is a ThinkPad W530, which is pretty beefy. But I found out over time that smaller machines can do then that. A lot of things can be tried out, even as I said, in a virtual machine within even a Windows desktop or on a Mac or whatever, as long as you can do this virtualization within virtualization, the nested virtualization. And there are several options for that. On Linux, the most easy to use would be KVM, where we now have for most of the latest CPUs support for running KVM on top of KVM. Yeah, as I said, if you have enough RAM, the whole thing may also run in a VM with nested virtualization. The other thing we need is, of course, documentation. We need lots of documentation, how to set up that laptop or prepare virtual machine hosts, prepare the host network. The network always kills me. I mean, I can get it all done, and then it's, okay, I have to do bridges, I have to create my virtual networks, and so on. Create individual virtual machines to run, and so on and so on. But ideally, we want to replace a lot of that documentation by tools, so that you don't have to read the documentation, you just run the tools, you use the tools to build things. Where tools come in handy, just a few examples. First of all, creating the ultimate host system. If you have a live CD to start with that is just in the open build system, in the open build service, that you can check out, where you say, okay, I take openSUSE 12.3 or whatever, and I build a version of it that already includes the virtualization layer, all pre-configured, and the network, the virtual network. Creating the virtual images, of course, wiring the networks, and then creating those screenplays. And of course, we need a project infrastructure for all that. We need a website or blogs where we talk about the results, mailing lists, and so on, Git repos. This is still work in progress for Chabata, but the most obvious choice these days is using GitHub, and I'm also tying into the openSUSE wiki infrastructure a bit. So lots of pieces in this puzzle. Is this going to be a huge project? I mean, it looks like it's quite an ambitious project. Yes, it is, but luckily there is an existing huge project that's kind of the hugest open source project after Linux at the moment that we can leverage, and that's OpenStack. I guess most of you have at least heard about OpenStack. It's now in the press sometimes called the cloud operating system, so it's like the Linux for the desktop or server. It's running the whole data center, that's the idea. You could also put it a bit more bluntly and say it's a set of Python scripts. Both is true, so it's all written from scratch based on 2 projects from Rackspace and NASA that have merged. And it's evolving very quickly to become a reliable platform that covers those 3 building blocks. Compute infrastructure, networking it all, and most of that also supports fully software-defined networks where you don't need any switches. And storage. Again, storage, you don't have to have expensive storage, you can just use software-defined storage that's running on bare metal with hard disks and standard CPUs. This is meant to be running in huge data centers with hundreds of servers or thousands of servers, but it also scales down and can be run on a laptop. That's the cool thing. And OpenStack has most of what we need for the runtime environment of Chabata. We have an easy setup. Right now I'm using DevStack, which is actually meant for development, and it's a very hacky Perl script, but it does the job. Not so much on SUSE, I'll come to that later, but in principle it does. And there's work ongoing to make this even more easy. And OpenStack has all those problems to solve themselves. They have to have reliable testing environments they need for daily testing, because they have a process where any check-in would result in a test run and so on. Virtualization environment is covered. That's the Nova component. So I mentioned all those code names in case you run, you see them later. There's an image store where you can put Linux images to start in your cloud. It's called Glance. Software-defined network that can be based on real hardware or virtual networks. So Neutron basically abstracts between software-defined and really hardware-defined networks. That's Neutron. A dashboard where we can do all those fancy things I've talked about, where you can show your scenarios and add additional content, documents, I don't know, videos where you add more value to the demo. That's called Horizon, and it's written in Python and based on Django. And finally, the automation, so orchestrating many pieces, and there's a project called Heat that is in the first step taking what Amazon is doing. There's the CloudFormation API that you can use in Amazon EC2, Amazon Web Services, but they are now also adding their own native format. So what's missing? A few things are still missing. First of all, as I said, the easy setup, the DevStack is really not the right answer for what we want. We basically want to start with a live CD, an image that you can download and that bootstraps the rest. There is a GUI for running complex scenarios, but that's just a prototype. It's called Thermal, so it bases on the Heat stack. That's why they call it Thermal. It already has some graphical stuff, and there's a video in the internet if you Google for it, Thermal Heat. But it's really just a prototype. We need some kind of public library where we can put all those scenarios. There are some existing libraries for those CloudFormation templates in Amazon, lots of them actually. But for that particular case, if you want to use openSUSE as the base and so on, of course we would have to have our own catalog of stuff that really works with openSUSE. The actual images, of course, that are referenced in those templates, and tools, as I said, for building images and the scenarios, and the actual images. that work with heat. Well, the design choices that I've made for now, first of all, of course, basing it on openSUSE, which is not an easy choice at the moment because OpenStack is really mainly driven by developers using Debian, Ubuntu, Fedora at the moment, and that's really something that I want to change as part of this project. I want to, because I'm using openSUSE with OpenStack, make sure that it's in better shape, that all the scripting, all the demo environments that they build on top of other Linux distros also work for openSUSE. So openSUSE would be used for the main demo image that runs on the laptop, the image templates. Of course, we would also, for our corporate side of the of that picture, we would have them based on SUSE Linux Enterprise. OpenStack for providing the virtualization framework, as I mentioned. I think we don't have to go through those again. And specific Chabata-related improvements as part of that Horizon plugin that I mentioned. And this all is obviously going to be written in Python. Licensing-wise, it would be following the OpenStack licensing, which is a pretty liberal one. Why Python? First of all, because it's the language OpenStack is written in. Personally, I think Python really rocks. After all stuff I've seen, I'm always coming back to Python because for me it has the right balance of being a full, complete language that you can use for writing large applications, just a few scripts, huge libraries with, as they call it, batteries included. You can have libraries for XML manipulation, for any kind of web servers and so on. But for me, it's the only language I know well enough to use, of course, which is always a driving force for developers. The components that we need, yeah, this is kind of repeating base Linux images and those libraries, references, and as I said, also documentation and content that could be anything from HTML content to slide decks to videos that we can link into this whole thing. So if you want to show off a story about how can I secure the world according to, this prison break motif, you could do that with showing, this is my Linux-based infrastructure. I've got software-defined switches. I'm using encryption and so on. And then you have those images, and you can have additional content with videos, with animations, all those things. And then storybooks that kind of bring this all together. Again, those could be written in HTML and with some kind of workflow. And the image store I mentioned already. So how would a typical demo workflow work? You download the main image, you install that either on physical hardware, which is recommended if you want to show off large things and it has to be very fast. Or for smaller demos, you could, as I said, just use that in a virtual machine again, nested virtualization. You need internet connection for that, of course. Then you can start Chabata. That VM would only have the base that you really need, and then you can go to the catalog and select scenarios from Chabata and download those scenarios. Again, you need internet for that. But after that, you don't need internet anymore. So you can demo things on site. Sometimes we've got customers who say, well, it's so hard to open the firewall for that meeting room to get you access to the internet, or why can't you just bring your own stuff? And then you can basically prepare, you go there and it's all on the box. Of course, unless you demo something that is using, I don't know, Google or so, or Amazon, then you have to be connected. Some examples. So those are graphics I drew for the Hack Week project in spring, where I kind of kicked off Chabata internally. This would be a very simple scenario with let's say a WordPress instance. I've got a client, gateway, load balancer on port 80. This load balancer is basically just a single instance balancer for now because I only have one backend. But it may maybe do the SSL encryption. Then I've got the data center network, web server, and the database. I then can scale this out and show the same thing with 2 web servers, for example. And of course, when it's in production, I can also add monitoring. I could maybe marry that to Nagios or so, and have those pictures where I can explain things, and then I've got the traffic sign, the traffic lights where I see what the servers are doing, and maybe even you click on the server, you get more details and all those things. This is a prototype, a bit hard to read, of how such a template could look like, and this was my own invention. Now I'm more tending towards what Heat is doing, the OpenStack project, but it's in this case it's syntax-wise it's basically JSON, so very simple nested structures where you describe the nodes, and then you have like needs. You could also say requires. Let's say this node up there is a load balancer. It requires middleware to run first because otherwise there's nothing to load balance. And there's a Django web server and so on. And then you need some engine, and that's, as I said, Heat can do that for you. That makes sure that all those run, and Heat can even in the latest incarnations be used for dynamic machine configurations where you say, okay, I'm running out of capacity for my web server, so start new instances or reduce the number of instances again. Now, where's the live demo? Well, to be honest, there's not going to be a live demo today. I'm very grateful to my colleague Andreas Jäger, AJ, that we have slides at least, because I had to be out of the office for 2 days before that trip, and he just sent it all to me via email, so I was able to present today. But stay tuned. Time-wise, I could show you a mock-up demo, but because we only have like 10 minutes left, we skip that. What is the project status? Well, as I said, I started at Hack Week. The whole idea has been in my head for more than a year. I've made some experiments, as I said, this code, and this is actually working. This template is working. I've got some Python, some couple of lines of Python script that actually would start up virtual machines in OpenStack with that code. Luckily, OpenStack itself makes a lot of progress, so that solves some of our problems without even getting engaged. So the first step should really be, as openSUSE community, get involved with OpenStack. It's really fun because it's a community that's very lively, where there are a lot of real problems to be solved, and the iterations are very short, so within weeks you can make progress. It's a very open community where anybody can submit proposals called blueprints, and those are voted on, and it's not like a lot of overhead to get involved. And as I said, right now it's a world where openSUSE doesn't play the role it should be. openSUSE is a very strong distro when it comes to desktops. KDE lovers love it because we have the best KDE and so on, and the GNOME lovers love it because we have one of the best GNOMEs. But when it comes to those cloud scenarios, it's kind of second choice at the moment because not many developers are using it, so we should really change that. So I encourage you to join the project. Right now, I only have this one landing page on opensuse.org, and I'll put my email address there and make sure that you can contact me. And of course, you can contact me during the event here. I'm going to stay until the end. You can also join SUSE as a company, of course. We are hiring, and that's the slide I always have to show. I don't know if this one is going to work on the screen, but it's on the slide, so maybe take a photo or so. And some of those jobs really are OpenStack. Actually, quite a few of them are OpenStack jobs. So if you're a Python developer, but we're also looking for other stuff, graphics designers and so on. And finally, the project itself. Again, this is if you don't want to join a company, but just want to participate. What Chabata really would need is, as I said, Python experts who want to hack on OpenStack, upstream ideally, of course. Web and graphics designers, there's a lot of work to do for them. Open build service experts to help with the stuff going on there, especially KIWI, if you have KIWI knowledge. Testers later when we have something to show, and so on. That's it for now. I really think that this is a project that could be very much not just useful, but also fun to work on. So I encourage you, if you are interested, join me. If you are just waiting to use it, we have to wait a couple of more weeks or months until we have something real in place that's going beyond the demos. But I'm pretty sure that by end of the year, when we have our SUSECon in Florida, there's something to show off that I'll also make publicly available then, of course. Okay, if there are any more questions, I think we have like a couple of minutes left for questions. This guy over there.
Yes, I have two questions about, I think the Chabata project used the OpenStack, but why use the OpenStack? Do you consider use, for example, OpenNebula?
No. Well, you could, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe for just running it on the laptop and so on, OpenNebula is even better suited as it is today. It's a bit like BSD and Linux. At some point, BSD was the better operating system, but Linux was evolving faster. OpenStack right now is in that position. It still sucks in many cases. It's very new, but it's a project with hundreds of contributors. When they have their events, it's, I don't know, this year it's 500, next time it's 1,000 participants, then it's 2,000. It's growing so fast, there's a lot of momentum. So ultimately, I think there's no other cloud solution that can survive in the overall big picture, being the big player. Of course, there are niches where, yeah, OpenNebula or also, yeah, some of the other projects like the stuff that Citrix open sources. So I mean, those still have their merits, but our focus right now is really on OpenStack, and it scales down well enough. It's still missing some of the nice graphical things that you have out of the box in OpenNebula. That's for sure.
Yeah, because my question is, for your slide, our process is one, download the Chabata and to choose the scenario. But I think the question is, if someone who is an organizer, who is a marketing, who is a documenting, they want to show up the power of openSUSE. So question one is, where is the OpenStack server we can use? Yeah, this is the first one, because we must choose the scenario, yeah, for the VM, right? So where we can choose it, we can connecting back to the SUSE Studio or anything else. Because I don't see any demo here, so I can understand. I can not really understand what's the process if we want to show the power. And the second one, why not consider to the OpenNebula? Because I think OpenNebula is more simple to create, because you know the OpenStack, there are 7 projects for the OpenStack, and to build the OpenStack server is more difficult to the normal engineer. So the SUSE provide OpenStack and Chabata project to use for the normal end user or documenting members.
Yeah. Well, yeah, obviously that's really part of the project to make sure that we have this easy to use image that has an OpenStack running. DevStack is just a script that can get things up and running from the sources, and it works pretty well, but it's hacky. It's a big hack, and as I said, not so well suited for openSUSE. Yeah, that's one of the most immediate deliverables, to get to an image where you just download a live CD that already includes a running OpenStack. That's going to be easier than OpenNebula then, because it's all pre-configured. It's some work to do, but it's work we have to do anyway, because we have to, OpenStack is our second bet. We have the SUSE Cloud product. We really want to do that. And it is complicated at first, but you can all scale it down to running a single database, Postgres or MySQL, and it doesn't really take lots of memory. So you can scale it down, and you can run it on a laptop. Yeah. But yeah, that's not done yet. Right now, if you want to do it today, OpenNebula is probably the much easier choice, or other things like there's Vagrant, for example, where you use what is it called? VirtualBox as the base. there are existing projects that come close, but all of them are kind of, well, off mainstream in the long run, I think. Okay.
Other questions? Nothing? IRC questions? No, nothing? Really?
Okay.
Anything else you want to say?
Yeah, maybe just some more advertisements. I'm going to try to have a bird of feather session later this week or over the weekend, where we want to discuss how we can improve in general the situation with developers and openSUSE. I've seen a lot of projects that are very active, but nobody's using openSUSE. They are all using Ubuntu, yeah, and we have to change that. If we want to stay relevant as a community, we have to change that. And I also tried, as part of my daily job, to talk a bit about the new installer that we are planning for /12. So stay tuned for the bird of feather sessions. Those two I'm planning to offer, and those will not be scripted. There will be no slides, just me and you and a whiteboard or so. But I want to really figure out some of those topics together with you. Thank you.